All right, welcome into my college football week number 9 instant reaction, where I go over all the ranked games and also talk about the updated FPI analytical rankings, beginning with Georgia beating Florida very easily in that rivalry game. Although that's a rivalry that's just been horrible really the past 6 years. Georgia, there's definitely going to be a narrative for them to be ranked first, considering this was an impressive victory. They were sitting minus 14. They easily won. Florida scores like 2 garbage time touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Certainly, Georgia looks very good now. When it comes to their ranking on Tuesday night, they're not going to be number one just based off of their bad resume, but certainly a lot of people think they're the best team in college football right now. You do have Ohio State beating Wisconsin. Ohio State at this point, they are what they are. They do not have a good quarterback. Kyle McCord had a pretty crazy stat line: 2 interceptions, 1 lost fumble, 2 intentional groundings. He's just not very mobile and extremely inconsistent in terms of his accuracy. But if you are Ohio State, you do still have a good defense. Although, let's be honest, Wisconsin was without their starting quarterback. Braylon Allen, their number one running back, got hurt. They were really a shell of themselves. The Buckeyes were minus 14.5, and they win by 14. Lower scoring game there. I am expecting Ohio State to be ranked number one based on their resume in terms of the college football playoff rankings. You do have FSU easily beating Wake Forest, so that's a solid win for FSU, scoring 34 points in the first half. Wake Forest, obviously not a good team, but we saw FSU struggle in a similar spot at Boston College in a noon window earlier this year. Washington, it's just red flags galore with them. They end up beating Stanford 42-33. They get lucky on a dropped fourth down pass. I am very concerned with Washington. I do think they will lose one regular season game and then possibly lose in a rematch against Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, just based on how bad their defense is playing. And also, Washington has no run game, so they are just not a complete team right now. Penix Jr. certainly had a very good stat line. That's going to help him in terms of the Heisman. Oh yeah, by the way, guys, how about Marvin Harrison Jr. possibly entering the Heisman race? Obviously, that all comes down to what he does against Michigan, and he's a receiver, so he can't really dictate how good McCord is. But yeah, I think Marvin Harrison Jr., based on how the Heisman is setting up, he does have a realistic shot to win it. Again, he's going to need 200 yards and 2 touchdowns against Michigan, and they're going to have to beat Michigan, but the path for him is there. And also, I would say the path for Penix Jr. is also there even after the really bad week he had. This was a good game for him, but I'm still worried about Washington and the way they've played. Oklahoma loses the upset to Kansas. Interesting game here. Kansas was sitting plus 10. The line closed plus 8. Bad weather. Oklahoma just really not good enough in terms of Dylan Gabriel. He had a bad game. And Kansas, give them credit, they should be ranked inside of the top 20. They're 6-2. That was a big win with their backup quarterback, Jason Bean. And we're starting to see the Big 12 show significant, kinks in the armor there. They will get very likely 1 or 0 teams in the college football playoff. It's very likely, actually, the Big 12 gets no teams in. You do have Texas beating BYU. Listen, I did have BYU plus the 18 or plus the 20, whatever it is. And to be honest, if you look at the stat line of this game in terms of yards, this should have been a lot closer than 35-6. It is what it is. It's a good win for Texas. Another 35-6 game. That's very random. Back-to-back 35-6 games. Oregon crushes Utah, and I knew it, guys. Utah and North Carolina, the two frauds. Oregon with an easy win. Utah, just zero offense in this game. They should be ranked outside of the top 20 at least. Penn State beats Indiana. There's some real red flags right now with Penn State football. No explosive plays. Indiana was up in this game late in the second quarter. It's just surprising right now, and I think it's very obvious Penn State's going to finish the year 10-2 with losses to Ohio State and Michigan. That's just the reality for Penn State. That's kind of their ceiling. Maybe you could say they've got a chance against Michigan because they're at home. I get it. It'll be a good game, but it's very hard to see Penn State, based on how badly they're playing on offense, beating Michigan, even though they are going to be at home. Arizona beats Oregon State. What a crippling loss if you are Oregon State. That's a game you have to win. You have to win that game. And I know Arizona, they have good offensive upside, but still, the Pac-12 is tough. You have to win that game on the road. If Oregon State would have won that game, they could have had another loss this year and still had an amazing season. Now that they have 2 losses, very likely with their schedule going to be suffering more. It's a tough one. You were only 3-point favorites. You end up losing on the road. What are you going to do? Ole Miss beats Vanderbilt in kind of a very irrelevant game, 33-7. I do think Ole Miss covered that spread. There was no way they were 26-point favorites. I think they were like 25-point favorites though. But yeah, Ole Miss still only with 1 loss. I do expect them to lose at least 1 more game. We will see. Notre Dame destroys Pittsburgh. Notre Dame's a really good team, and Notre Dame has to be absolutely kicking themselves. They had the game won against Ohio State. They end up the dropped interceptions, the 4th and 19 conversion by the Buckeyes, and they're sitting there kind of irrelevant at this point. You know, already with 2 losses, there's no conference championship they can play in. They have 0 chance at making the playoff, but they could finish 10-2. They do have an interesting game with Clemson. I understand people saying Clemson's not very good this year, but still, they're a competitive team. And there it is. My upset officially comes through with Georgia Tech beating North Carolina. Crazy high-scoring game. I said North Carolina was a fraudulent team. They have no defense. Georgia Tech, the 46 points, and they end up winning. North Carolina is going to be unranked. Louisville beats Duke 23-0. You know, you got to feel bad for Duke in a situation like this. It's very clear Riley Leonard is injured. Good for Louisville. They're probably going to move inside. Yeah, they're definitely going to move inside of the top 15. They're 7-1. But Duke, it's unfortunate. You know, you're already a team that's kind of like the little engine that could, and then your quarterback gets injured and tries to play through it. It's a miserable spot to be in. Air Force, the greatest prediction in college football history. If you don't believe me, go back to my week number 1 college football prediction video, part 2. That's where this prediction was made, when I said Air Force going into week 1 would finish undefeated and make the playoff. Right now, they're 8-0. This does have the potential to be the greatest prediction in college football history. Guys, obviously, Air Force is not making the playoff. It's just impossible based on how bad their schedule is. But still, if they do actually go undefeated, you have to admit that's a pretty good prediction by me. 30-13 over Colorado State in the snow. They're 8-0 right now. Unfortunately, the College Football Committee is probably going to rank them outside of the top 20 because they have no good wins, but still, good for Air Force. Tennessee beats Kentucky. That's a good win for Tennessee. Tennessee proved me wrong. Tennessee, 33 points. I'm shocked they scored that much. They're one-dimensional, but Joe Milton played well. That's a big win on the road against an annoying Kentucky team for Tennessee. I was almost correct on the Rice upset over Tulane, but Rice does cover the 11.5-point spread. They end up losing by 2 there. You do have UCLA over Colorado. Surprising low-scoring game. Colorado and Shedeur Sanders really falling off a little bit. Sanders had a really the problem with Colorado is they have 0 running game. They're extremely one-dimensional. And obviously their defense is not good, although this game it was actually pretty good, only allowing 28 points. USC beats California 50-49. So we all know the matchup, the bowl matchup is coming. USC versus Iowa. The script is already out on that. We know it's coming, guys. What an amazing bowl game that is going to be. And then James Madison barely beats Old Dominion. Credit to Old Dominion for fighting in that game. They end up losing only by 3. And then taking a look at the updated analytical rankings, you do have Ohio State sitting at number 1. They are slightly less than 1 point better than Michigan, according to the analytics guys. I would say Michigan at this point, certainly more upside. It just comes down to Kyle McCord. And I never thought I would say this about a Ryan Day Ohio State team, but it's becoming very clear that Ryan Day made the wrong call. He saw McCord in practice for 2 straight years. At some point, you just got to admit, this dude's not good enough. You need to go to the portal. You need to do something. Kyle McCord has concrete feet. If anyone breathes on him, he fumbles the football. He's extremely inconsistent. Yes, he makes great throws, but he also makes really bad throws. And, how many intentional groundings has he had? He's had like 8 intentional groundings now. So for Ohio State, you're really just holding your breath every time Kyle McCord drops back to pass, especially with also not a good offensive line. I will say Trevion Henderson, he's starting to really come on. He's understanding this is so important for him considering he's a third-year back. He can really have a crazy end of the year and possibly be a late round 1, maybe round 2 draft pick if he finishes off the year great. And that was a really good performance against Wisconsin. Maybe that's Ohio State's identity. I don't know. Just run it to Trevion Henderson. Although Ohio State does have a tendency to run the ball on 1st and 10, I would expect Day to break that tendency against Michigan. We will see, but right now I would say Michigan is just straight up better than Ohio State. I understand if you want to put Ohio State above them because Michigan has beaten literally no one and Ohio State has quality wins. It is what it is. You have Alabama at number 3. Bama should be lower than that, but I do think Bama is underrated right now. Oregon looks phenomenal. Even with the loss to Washington, Oregon looks really good. They're number 4. Penn State at number 5, I would put them at number 9 or number 10. They do not have the offensive upside. Georgia at number 6, I would have to have Georgia at around number 3 right now. Personally, I would probably have Michigan 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3. You do have Florida State at number 7. I would probably have Florida State at number 4. Remember, Florida State has a win against LSU, neutral site. They're looking impressive. Although I will say the thing about Florida State, they have gotten some big breaks with opposing quarterbacks getting injured. Now, it's not their fault. I'm not saying it's their fault, but you do have to add context to that. Oklahoma sitting at number 8. I think Oklahoma's in for a rude awakening. In that rivalry game against Oklahoma State on the road, they might be a team that suffers back-to-back losses. You do have Texas at number 9. That's understandable. I might have them at number 8 or number 7. LSU at number 10. They've just got no defense. Notre Dame sitting at number 11. That's understandable as well. And then how about Kansas State? Yes, Kansas State is quickly becoming one of the more underrated teams in college football. The analytics love them. They're destroying everyone. They just crushed Houston. You do have Ole Miss sitting at number 13. Obviously, Washington should be higher than number 14, but I agree. I think people are starting to overrate Washington because of that win they had against Oregon. Remember, Oregon outgained them by 150 yards, and Oregon very easily could have won that game, and that game was at Washington. So you understand Washington being ranked high, but still, that was a game they very easily could have lost. Tennessee at number 15. It's understandable. A&M should be lower than 16, obviously. USC sitting at number 17. USC just has no defense. Oregon State at number 18. Probably right. Yes, SMU, guys, is a top 20 team. They're very good. They just destroyed Tulsa like 69-10 or something. And they had like 50 points in the first half. SMU has crazy upside. SMU is probably the best group of 5 team right now. Obviously, Air Force is still undefeated, so they're going to be ranked higher. Clemson at number 20 at 4-4. Clemson is completely fallen off. Dude, people are going to love that Clemson is in front of Louisville, 7-1 versus 4-4. You got to love team talent, right? There is Louisville. Obviously, some of these rankings are terrible. North Carolina at number 22. Yeah, they're going to fall out of the top 25 in terms of the actual rankings. Miami at 23. They barely won in overtime in their game. Missouri sitting at number 24. They're going to be a lot higher than that in the actual rankings. UCLA coming in at 25. They're a solid team sitting at 6-2. And then Utah falling back significantly with basically no offense. But guys, that is going to do it for my official college football recap. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.